grower for dehydration and flash freeze, or just dehydration. And Bob Hoffman from Shenandoah Greenhouses in Virginia. Potted herbs and basil. I guess the topic, or the reason for this is to get and share information grower to grower, and I guess from grower to extension and Rutgers as to what else as an industry we need. One of the things that's a little disappointing, I don't see any Wyenandt guys here, because another part of this industry in my territory in South Jersey is, of course, field production of basil, either cut and boxed and bunched, and it's all field production. But here we have potted, we do have field production, and of course hydroponics, so there's no hydroponic person up here. So I guess we're going to start with questions. Does anybody have questions in the audience to the growers? And then we'll go from the growers are here to growers in the audience and to Rutgers and any other personnel that's out there. Alan.
Do I have a question?
Does anybody have any questions for Alan? Large grower in Illinois, field production of basil. What does he do?
Just describe your field situation, please. Your production system.
It's a raised bed system that is direct seeded, machine harvest.
Hold on, the microphone's not working.
I didn't do it.
Speak up close, it's on. Let's see if it tests. There it is. Loose wire.
Technical. Hello?
Andy, can you give him yours?
Somebody else.
It's just open field direct seed production for machine harvest,
Test
for
it now.
IQF and some freeze dried. We also have a partner company, Gold State Herb, that also does air drying in California. So we classify it as industrial ingredients for other food processors to make prepared food ingredients. So as you go down the aisle in the grocery store, there are a lot of items that would have our basil as an ingredient in them. The one comment I would make pertaining to this meeting is we do about a 2-acre research, and probably about 30% of that is Basil Downy Mildew research. So we're looking for efficacy, and we've got a lot of advice from Dr. Ray, and I think he's doing some excellent research that we try to duplicate in Illinois. So we're not inventing it, we're sort of copying what he's doing, but we appreciate all the work that he does. And doing some of that trial plots yourself, random replicated plots, when you go out and do the spraying and take the data, that's when you really find out what works and what doesn't work. So I would encourage everybody to do some of your own research and actually find out. I mean, there's a lot of growers that just grow up and they spray stuff just so they can sleep at night. It doesn't necessarily all work. The time you spend in research is extremely important.
I'm Bob Hoffman from Shenandoah Growers, and we're kind of the other end of the market spectrum. We grow living potted herbs organically, and we sell it directly to supermarket chains, and the supermarkets display ours and sell ours in a rack as a living product, as a live basil, similar to what you would see as a hydroponic, but ours is grown in a pot organically. So being a live herb product, we've encountered the same problems as you have in the field, but being in the greenhouse, we have a little bit more control over the environment. The fact that we're organic gives us less of a toolbox, less tools that we can use to try and control from a spraying point of view, and very few, I hate to say, but there is very little that have been effective. We've had a little bit of success with such products as Oxidate, basically hydrogen dioxide that will knock down the spore count or suppress the spore count. And we've tried just about everything organically that's out there. Again, just like my colleague over here says, set up your own trial areas, set up your own experimentation, see what works, see what doesn't. We've had also a little bit of limited success, which we think we have limited success. Maybe it's just helping us to sleep at night, with mill stop and a product called cease, another biological. Being that there's very little in the toolbox and that we are in the greenhouse, we have to take a different approach. And our approach that we take is try to control the climate as much as possible in the greenhouse. In the summertime, when it's very hot, you're kind of at the mercy of Mother Nature as you would be in the field, other than you can keep the rain off the plants. Even in this, the rest of the year, we try to control the humidity as much as possible, and we find that that is probably the most effective in controlling the disease. So we will sometimes sacrifice our yields in the greenhouse and spread our plants out a little bit further apart than they normally would be, as well as manipulating the climate and spending the money to heat and ventilate simultaneously to lower the relative humidity. And that seems to be the most effective tool of any. Even in the summer times, many times we have bottom heating pipes, and we create a convective dry air current coming up through the leaf canopy. And even during the summer times, we'll sacrifice going with a higher temperature just to be able to control the humidity better in that leaf canopy.
Are you in production 12 months of the year?
365 days a year plus.
Is there any point in that year that you're not in basil production?
I wish it, but market demand, so you got to be in those stores 365 days a year. The greenhouse overhead is very, very expensive to do a setup like this, so we have to produce 365 days a year.
Well, you grow other herbs besides basil?
Yes, we grow, usually at the most part, we'll have a total of 9 to 10 herbs, basil being the most important, basil being almost half of our production.
I think what Andy's asking though is if you would maybe use a different rotation in the greenhouse to the location of these.
We tried going into a different greenhouse, and it with some plants, so in other words, to a greenhouse where there was no downy mildew. That works for a little while. It's basically when the conditions are conducive, or you have spores that are windblown. So for our history, previous to 2008, 2009, let's say, I think we had downy mildew in 2008 maybe, but I just didn't know what it was at the time. I thought it was nutritional. And then first you look at it and say, that's calcium deficiency. Then you look at it, no, it's magnesium deficiency. Then you look at it again and say, it's a little bit chlorotic, and maybe it's nitrogen deficiency in general. And over the years, been able to, besides identifying it, we've been able to pinpoint windblown, almost like clockwork. Most years, it'll be the first to second week of June that we'll start getting pressure. So we have the same seed, same greenhouse, same area. We have very, very, very high density plantings. So let's say a mature crop will only be 6 inches by 6 inches on center per pot. And in that pot, there's usually about 8 to 9 plants, basil plants in that small pot. So the density is there, all the conditions are conducive to it. It's just when it starts getting windblown, or when the other possibility is that it's just getting too hot where the heating and ventilating is not working as far as dehumidification.
When is pressure, downy mildew pressure, the least? I assume it's sometime during, or is it continually?
Now.
So
the
starts
bigger,
up in the summer, June, from an outside source.
possibly from an outside source, or possibly the spores are always there. I don't think the spores are ever gone, since we're 365 days a year. It's a matter of you're always living with those spores. It's how much you're able to manage those spores. So the spore count itself. So right now, we were just about to the point saying, can we still grow basil? We were at that point in October.
How much of your basil takes up greenhouse space 12 months of the year?
How much of our basil?
How much is it, 85% of your production? All year?
It's almost 50% of our production, all year round.
All year, solid.
Right.
You don't think a 1 week no basil period, or a...
1 week, no basil
Have you
period,
tried-
so we were at that point. We were at that point of saying either not be organic and see what's, go for the most effective fungicides that are out there. It's the same ones that you've been experimenting with. And I actually took a separate small transplant house and did trials with many of those fungicides in advance. The not being organic anymore, or leaving the greenhouse empty, but from a marketing point of view, we couldn't do that. I mean, once you lose a customer, it's pretty tough to get your foot back in the door. So so we have to be able to supply them. So we just made a more concerted effort to change the environment. What does it take to change that environment? So in the same heavily infested downy mildew greenhouse, I mean, we looked at all different methods. We even looked at leaving the greenhouse empty and bringing in a mold remediation crew that specializes in mold removal for hospitals, let's say, to come in. And then we thought about it, and then we decided we have the tools now, and it's cool enough outside to dehumidify the greenhouse well, and within 3 weeks, the greenhouse was completely turned around. So it's to the point where I'm asking researchers for a place to research some other techniques, because we don't have any downy mildew now, and we don't have anything to try our techniques on. Some of the techniques, such as light, such as UV lighters, or 660, let's say 630 nanometer red lights, LED lights, which is a good thing, but the point being is, if you have control of that environment, if you can control that humidity, you can control the disease. When it's too warm outside and you can't control that humidity in the greenhouse, then you're at the mercy of Mother Nature, pretty much. Any questions?
Yeah, one of the things, if you could maybe describe the levels of downy mildew that you can tolerate. Your two different production systems, and if there's any fresh market production in here, if they could chime in too, just to let us know that.
Okay, first of all, our market varies from time of year to time of year, so we have to overproduce to be able to satisfy the peak periods for our living pots. When we're not, the product, when the market is slower, when it's not at the peak season, we actually cut and sell that to our own within our own company. We also pack living herbs, fresh cut herbs in small plastic clamshells. So we do both, technically. We are a living plant grower, live pot grower, and we're also a cut basil grower in the greenhouse, though. We did have field production of basil on a very small scale, about 1.5 acres until 2010, and the reason we stopped was downy mildew. We got to a point where it just devastated the field, and it was not worthwhile, just for the small scale we were doing it. As far as the tolerance levels, we've been able to live through, well, let's say if the plant has been infected in the lower leaves, what we observe most of the time is it starts many times at the cotyledon stage or the first true leaf stage. And if we have strong enough growing conditions, once the plants are spread out and put in pots, then we can grow through it, or the plants, if the conditions change and the humidity is low enough, the plants will recover. So if it has enough light, so it's toughest in late November through mid-December, because there's lower light levels outside, and the disease pressure from cloudy, humid days is higher. But let's say at this time of the year, the sunlight has gotten stronger, the days have gotten longer, the temperatures are cooler, so we can heat and ventilate at the same simultaneously to lower the relative humidity. And in doing this, we pretty much eliminated downy mildew from the greenhouse. I'm sure there are spores around, but there are no symptoms on the plants at all at this point. And then come June, it's going to be a different story, so please hurry up with your breeding program.
In our case, we have an advantage being a processor during the processing. Some of the first steps is the triple wash, and the spores are pretty much washed off, and we don't see it in the final product. So our biggest concern is yield and production. We have customers that rely on us year-round for a certain inventory level, and we need to control the disease in order to hit those inventory levels. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to generate discussion, we focus on downy mildew, but after that, each of you have a secondary obstacle that's just going to replace then downy mildew gets solved?
Well, there was a time in my life when Fusarium was like,
I don't remember.
there was a time when certain varieties were lost, and there was about a 3-year period where there was no Fusarium-resistant varieties for processing. The resistant varieties pretty well take care of us now for Fusarium. Anything that we could do for cold tolerance, us being in the Midwest, you know, sometimes we get frost on September 15 and sometimes it's 1st of November. And when you get those cold nights in the fall, production drops off quite a bit of your growth. You get to a certain point where it's just not worth continuing anymore. So being able to take those cold snaps, and usually when it's below 55 at night, you're cold, you're low temperature, you don't get much growth the next day. You need a couple days to recover because you got sort of an unseen chill damage. And so for both fresh market for shipping and for any basil production out in the field, and kind of a resistance to chill damage would be advantageous.
55 degrees is when you start to see a slow growth, kind of a quiescent, the basil just kind of shuts down.
Yeah.
What temperatures do you notice when you actually see some foliar discoloration following morning?
Like 48.
Also, cold damage or cold tolerance is also our second biggest problem. But ours is a little bit different in the fact that it's usually post-harvest, both from when we cut the product and from when we're selling a live plant. We have to make it to, once the live plant is harvested, it goes into a sleeve, goes into a box, then it's chilled down, or cooled down to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but it has to go through the supermarket cold chain. So it goes on a truck. Most of the time we specify 55 to 60 degrees. It's not gonna, or 60 degrees is what we specify. If it goes down to 55, we're okay. And then, but many times those trucks may not be that accurate. You'll find it out on the recorder after you've gotten a rejection. Then the other part of that is making it through the supermarket cold chain. Just because you have a product and you specify it's supposed to be 55 to 60 degrees doesn't mean it's going to go out from their warehouse to be distributed to the individual supermarkets at 55 to 60 degrees. It might go on a truck that's 38 or 39 degrees. So that's, ours is post-harvest handling. So cold tolerance is extremely important.
Also to Andy's question as to what degree of infestation.
Okay.
And I think the people that are hydroponically growing have the worst case scenario because you're shipping your product in a plastic bag, usually with water in it. And if there's any infestation in it, then put in a box and sealed, you just created the perfect environment for it to continue or to spread if there's even a little bit. Is that the case? I mean, I've seen everybody, all the different brands in the different stores, and you know, you see it one day, and then 2 days later, the same package is completely broke down. Are the hydroponic people having that issue? Zero tolerance as far as contamination.
I'd say as a percentage for us, it's we have to spend the extra labor, but if it's just the first set of true leaves, we actually go through the labor of picking off. If it has 2 or 3 leaves, we can actually pick that off. Doesn't mean that there's no spores there. It just means that there's less likelihood that it's going to get damaged in shipping.
Any other questions?
Speaking of picking off leaves, I'd like a microphone to go to Tom Jarvis here. He has had some success, if you would mind relaying that story with picking off leaves in an infestation.
All right, I wasn't really prepared for this, but I was just talking to him outside in the hallway. And I actually did salvage a field of basil that we had last year that was probably 50% infected. And what I did, I had an earlier planting of about 6 rows on black plastic drip irrigation. It was an early planting, and basil got, and the downy got in there about middle of the end of June, first part of July, and it just wiped it out. No matter how much I sprayed it, it wouldn't work. So by the first part of August, it had gotten into the second planting, and it wasn't as bad as the first planting, but it was still pretty bad. So what I did, I took a chance. I had my men go out in the old field that was right alongside of the new field. They were planted about 3 weeks apart. And we very carefully pulled all the plants out of the bed, put them in plastic trash bags, put them in the dumpster. Then we went back to the new field, that was maybe 50 or 60% infected leaves on the plant. The plant still looked pretty good, but you could tell that there was infected leaves all over the plant. So we carefully picked every leaf off of the plant. Now again, this is a small operation, maybe a quarter of an acre at the most. But we carefully took all the leaves off the plant, put them in a black bag. We cut the plant down to 6-8 inches off the ground. I put Zanpro in the drip system, and I sprayed them with kelpite on a 5-day schedule, and I alternated between the kelpite and the Zanpro through the drip and aerial spray. And I used an air blast sprayer so I could get underneath the leaves. And by the end of August, the field came back and it was beautiful. And we harvested until the end of October. So maybe I was just really lucky, but between these two chemicals and the air blast and the drip irrigation, it saved the crop. And we're primarily a retail cash crop right front. We don't ship hardly anything to Philadelphia, so I can afford to take the time and try to salvage the crop because you're getting retail price for it. But you can save it, at least it worked that time. Now last year was exceptionally dry, it never got real hot, so we had kind of everything going in our favor, but it still worked.
You said air blast, is that a backpack type air blast?
I'm sorry?
When you said air blast spraying, is that a
Yes.
big rig or?
Yeah, the big air blast that I used for the melons and everything.
Oh, okay.
But I just idled it down so I didn't blow the plants off the beds. But with the air blast, we blow the plant over, so you're going to get the material underneath of it. The drip irrigation, the drip overhead spray nozzles don't work. You have to get under the plant, and the air blast worked.
In terms of greenhouse production, have you ever tried anything like a filter, like a series of screens to try to keep the
Spores out. I've done that in a controlled grow room and put HEPA filters on.
Did it work?
In the grow room, but again, they can control the humidity in the grow room too. So I just pulled because it reduces your airflow, I just pulled the HEPA filters off and it still worked. And the air intakes for that was right in our harvest area, in our packing area, where people were quality controlling, pulling off leaves with downy mildew. So I know the spores were there, but the spores were being filtered through a HEPA filter originally, and then I pulled the HEPA filters off and still didn't get downy mildew in the controlled grow room because I was able to control the humidity and give it the exact amount of light that it needed as well.
There's a grower in upstate New York, organic grower, who set up a greenhouse for using HEPA filters to keep the cucumber. There's a grower in upstate New York who's designed a greenhouse with HEPA filters, and he's used that completely successfully for cucumber downy mildew, where he's had it on the plants outside, not on the tunnel or greenhouse. Engineered by trade.
Is there much of a difference between cucumber and basil?
Shouldn't be. I mean, he looked at it from the size of the spore and knowledge of what the HEPA filter would do, and he's got it set up so it's. This is where my ignorance of engineering comes in. Does that have to be negative pressure or positive pressure so it's forced through the filters? That's the way he's got his greenhouse set up.
You're better off with positive pressure.
All right, so he's got it set up positive pressure so the airflow has to go through at a time that he knows there's spores around.
So, Meg, as far as from what you told me, you said these, and please, anybody else, let me know if that's correct, but the spore size of downy mildew is somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 17 microns? Somewhere in that neighborhood? Does anybody know?
I'd have to look it up myself, I don't know.
They're a little bigger. Like about between 20 and 30.
Okay, because the HEPA filters go down to 0.3 microns is what they are. So technically, you could, if you had a controlled area like a greenhouse, you could do work to try to eliminate it and everything. All the air has to come through a HEPA filter. But we've also looked into things like the agam agam filters that use dehumidifiers that use a salt brine of types, and that also kills spores and then returns the air back to the greenhouse. But again, only effective that type of filtration using that. We're using heat and salts is only effective when you're heating the greenhouse. But the HEPA filters could be used to clean up spores in a greenhouse situation by taking the air out and then just cycling it back in and knocking down your numbers of spores. The problem is maintenance, you still have to clean those filters as well.
Part of the idea was too, I think that we start with a clean greenhouse and keep it clean.
Right.
Rather than recycling as well.
Yeah. If you can clean up the greenhouse, that's ideal, or if you can keep the spores from entering the greenhouse, that's ideal. But again, it doesn't matter what the disease is. I've never seen, unless you're in a clean grow room, like some of the Japanese are doing with plant factories right now, and there's some places in the United States that are doing the same thing, taking a warehouse and doing vertical growing. No greenhouse, just completely warehouse growing. And many times they'll have air filtration, HEPA filtration, and keep it as basically like a clean room, like you were using for making silicon chips, let's say. That starts clean, stays clean, but you also have to remember when it's that it doesn't stay clean forever. Somehow something gets in there, and then there's no competition for those spores. It can explode pretty quickly if the environment is correct for that. So we try to stay as clean as possible, and we try to see if we can eliminate the conditions that the spores can reproduce, and try to manage it rather than try to eliminate it completely.
How's your watering in your greenhouse? Is it subsurface or is it spaghetti tube?
In the plug stage of production, in the early stage of production, it is overhead through a boom. After that stage, it goes into a nursery where the choice is either overhead through an irrigation boom or sub-irrigation through a flood net bench. So on the basil particularly, we eliminate the overhead irrigation at that stage and just go with sub-irrigation. From there, we move to a gutter system or a moving gutter system that is, which is like it's an NFT gutter, but it's with hole sizes and wide enough to grow a potted plant in there. So it's sub-irrigation as well.
So you're seeing Basil Downy Mildew at small transplant.
I've seen it even before the overhead. I've seen it at whether we did it with overhead irrigation or even with flood from sub-irrigation. It was still there, and that had to do more with the humidity in the greenhouse and the density of the crops. Once those leaves start overlapping, as I tried to point out, and that's really important, is not just the humidity in the air, but it's the humidity in that leaf canopy. Once that leaf canopy is dense, especially if it's cooler growing condition, their internodes are going to be shorter, your leaves are going to be overlapping and very tight, and the relative humidity, if your plants are active, just from transpiration, your relative humidity in that plant canopy are going to be much higher than your measured air relative humidity.
At that point, are they still under overhead, or have they moved to the pot?
At the point where I've seen it, most times when I see it, it's when the sub-irrigation has stopped already, but it started previous to that. So it probably started. We did some trials where we've done sub-irrigation as opposed to the overhead booms, and unfortunately we still had downy mildew. But I would be with you on that one. I would try to eliminate as much as possible on the overhead water.
Very good discussion.
Any other questions?
Are you growing different varieties? What's your main?
We have trialed different varieties. Our main variety is Aroma 2, and we have grown Kira looking for cold tolerance, and we've also grown Eleonora looking for downy mildew tolerance. And it has, the Eleonora has been effective somewhat. It still gets downy mildew. It's just gotten it later and less severe, but it has still gotten downy mildew.
In the research plots, we do variety trial plots, and we're evaluating varieties all the time. We tend to do a Genovese type. We're looking for plant habit, leaf shape, and flavor, since we're in the flavor business. Flavor is important.
What's your field watering like? How do you?
It's overhead sprinkler, primarily almost 100% pivot irrigation.
On bare ground beds?
Yeah.
Seeded?
Yeah, the whole idea of trying to keep the leaves dry and everything, we'll see some, because they're pivots and sometimes they're square fields, you almost get control plot on leaf wetness. Sometimes the corners are better where it's drier, sometimes they're worse. We can't do a whole lot about leaf wetness because in the Midwest we have heavy dew every night. And I thought about going to subsurface irrigation, but I can't quite see where it would work because there's leaf wetness irregardless of how you irrigate.
So going to a plastic mulch bed with drip would not be something you.
The mulch, I do see, now this year, normally we see downy mildew last week of July, first week of August. If we're in a drought, it might be the third week of August. If we've got a cold snap, a little bit, you'll see it as a cold front comes through and the temperature drops. Obviously, the warmer we are and the drier we are, the better off we are. We did see something unique this last year where we had a wet corner of the field and it looked like the humidity was a little higher under the canopy in a very small spot, and the downy mildew started there. And usually when downy mildew starts, especially with a little bit of breeze and the right temperatures, it'll go across the field in one night. But because it was only the right conditions just in that spot, it took almost 2 to 3 weeks to go across the field. That was on some organic production. So just the difference in soil moisture and the humidity under the canopy made that much difference.
Do you think trying to go to a drip in black plastic or white plastic mulch, try to push your early plantings to get them cut, done before?
Like I say, I mean, unless you can stop dew, and you'll see the difference between the shade and the sunlight, leaf wetness, I mean, you literally have to stop the formation of dew on the leaf, which is like controlling the weather. So that's pretty hard to do. In a more arid climate, you've got a lot more choices to make and things you can do. But
When's your first cutting on a typical year?
usually 4th of July,
So, okay, so
because we've got last frost in the spring to worry about and the temperatures. So our season is a little bit smaller season in the Midwest.
how important do you guys rely on the forecasting or the reports that you get from your extension service in your area on the whereabouts of the Basil Downy Mildew? Does that play a huge part?
I've looked at Meg's model, and one of the things I see is that it can just jump right over us. It can go from Kentucky to Wisconsin. I don't know if Meg has noticed anything too, but that was my original idea of looking at that reporting system and seeing, because every year it's going to come up from Florida. And so you thought maybe you could delay spraying until you saw it come up to the north, but it'll jump around the U.S. I've seen that quite a bit by looking at the reports.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much it's jumping around, but that's a problem when large retail stores have it distributed to all the residential gardens. So it's a little harder than watching the downy mildew cucurbits, which is much more predictable. With this, it's being distributed into the residential gardens, and so I think it'll be hard to predict its movement.
Yeah, even local greenhouse production, there's a lot of greenhouse growers, especially small growers, who have downy mildew. They don't even know it. Their exhaust fan comes on and the neighborhood's infected.
Are you guys buying treated seed?
That's a good question. It came up earlier, and one of the things that I've seen in the seed industry is the seed industry has gone from taking samples to try to show that their seed is clean, that's negative, to, and I think that us as growers, we have to have the same mindset. You have to assume that there's spores on the seed, because if you get a test result that shows that the seed is clean, that means only the sample is clean. And the seed industry has, I won't say across the seed industry, but a lot of the seed industry has gone to the same mentality that we assume there's downy mildew spores on the seed and we treat for growers. That's a huge advantage for growers, that you work with a seed company that assumes that their seed is infected, because wherever that seed was produced, more likely they had downy mildew, and then treat it the best they can and sell that to their customers. So if you work with a seed company, ask them that question. Is it automatically treated, heat treated? And you might consider that when purchasing seed. You're still going to get downy mildew anyway, but at least it won't come from the seed.
We got time for one more thought, question, idea to our growers? Well, let's give them a big round of applause.